and welcome to this roundtable event, which is promoted by Europe and Middle East Peace Forum. We are a community-based initiative that started just a couple of months ago and wants to promote public debate on the connection between the current crisis in the Middle East and the European elections, which will take place very soon in June. This is the second public event that we are running after the Italian one, which took place last month and was quite successful. This time we're focusing on Malta just a couple of months ago. That's the specific context within which we have invited between the panelists that are relevant to the Maltese elections environment. So thanks also to the public that is connected on YouTube through the live feed. I just wanted to remember that the public can ask questions to the panelists at the second part of this event, just by posting questions on the comment section in the feed. So quite successful. Get ready eventually with some questions. This event in Malta is part of a series of events which we are conducting at national level. We've had events in Italy and this one not in Malta, but also we will have other similar events in France, Spain, and Ireland. The ambition is then to have an international debate, which hopefully will happen before the closing of the Parliament term in Brussels. So that's the end of April. And this event should consolidate and expand what has been discussed at the national level and then connect directly with the election campaign, which will happen over the following weeks until the beginning of June, which is the date of the election. So I'm now introducing the panelists that have kindly agreed to join us. We have Alex Agius Saliba, is a member of the Parliament in Brussels or the European Parliament, and is also Vice President of the Progressive Group of the Parliament. We have Callus, who's an activist from the movement Graffiti in Malta, and we have Giampietro Pizzo, who's an economist from Italy. There are people that I have to mention that are missing from this debate, because I would normally have a balanced kind of panel of people. But for example, I have not been able to invite to have participants from the other party in Malta. I also tried to have some journalists, some academics, some diplomats into this, but at this stage, we were not really able to have them participating in the event, but I have their interest and willingness to eventually participate in further events that we may have. Just a little caveat about the focus of our initiative. Our initiative doesn't look at immediate current events happening in the Middle East, in Palestine, in Gaza, but is actually focusing on longer-term peace proposals. I fully understand that it's very difficult to have this focus while we are at the peak, probably, of the military intervention in Gaza. But that's the kind of focus that we've decided to have, and it's also a distinctive point, if you want, of this initiative versus whatever else is happening in this area. So I will start with a question to Giampietro Pizzo. And with Giampietro, we've been discussing for a couple of months now about how to approach this issue of Palestine and how to approach the issue of building sustainable proposals for peace in the Middle East. Giampietro wrote an article about this, which was published at the beginning of January on our blog. And now I leave to him to summarize what he said in that article and what now can be brought to the attention of this particular group. Giampietro, please.
Yeah, thank you, Enzo. Thank you to everybody. I would like to introduce in a very few words some of the relevant issues I think we need to discuss. We need to discuss in terms of, first of all, I think in terms of civil societies, because the problem is, it's clear that the situation of conflict and the number of conflicts that are arising in different parts of the world is necessary, first of all, to have an active role of civil society to reestablish the minimum elements to have a dialogue. It's clear that when we arrive at this situation of military intervention and conflict, it seems that our culture, our capacity to take initiative is practically muted by the noise of the arms. But in any case, we need is a sort of moral duty, I think, to try to insist on this in a logic in which we construct, we build up a peace process. First of all, I have to remember that we are practically more of 5 months after the 7th of October. That is, this conflict is practically one of the longest in the Middle East, even, and that is similar to what happened in other regions. That is a permanent conflict that is producing a very destabilizing situation for the normal life of people. And it's clear that the tragedy is continues in terms of humanitarian tragedy, and the human lives are every day practically destroyed by this very ugly situation. But I think we need, as Enzo said before, we need to try to imagine different scenarios. A scenario in which we try to be very realistic, first of all, because it's not to imagine a dream, but the real constructive process. And first of all, we have to underline the situation is Europe as political subject is almost missing. USA is in a very embarrassing situation. And if you consider that even the president of USA is asking Netanyahu to negotiate, but he's completely refusing this approach, I think that it's clear that there is a real problem in terms of what is the new geopolitical balance in the region. And that is a political fact we have to try to analyze and consider in a very detailed way. But in any case, I think we have to try to raise the pressure I insist, by the citizens, by the normal people, to have a diplomatic initiative. We know that in these days they retake the negotiation in Cairo, but without the presence of Israel. And yeah, there is a different signal, but it's not so concrete and not so positive, this signal. But I think we need to monitoring and to understand if some small rooms is opening in terms of, first of all, the ceasefire, because otherwise, if we don't have the capacity to mute the arms, to enter in the weapons, and to enter in a very different level of political negotiation, I think is impossible to imagine a perspective. So first of all, ceasefire is the priority, but at the same time, it's very difficult to understand who is able to impose the ceasefire in this situation. United Nations is practically outside the negotiation, is not able now the General Secretary tried many times in the past month, but at least we have a clear failure of this initiative. I think the role of Arab countries is very interesting to consider, and maybe is an opportunity even for a different role of the Arab cooperation in the region to take the initiative. Even the Cairo negotiation could be a good point if succeed on this in this aim to arrive at the stop of the conflict before the start of the Ramadan. On the other side, I think we have to start to imagine what is the precondition to have a sustainable ceasefire, because it's clear there is a problem in terms of who is in charge, who could be in charge of a dialogue, and how we can establish the minimum condition for a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. And it's clear that the lack of credibility and the lack of capacity of the Palestinian Authority is one of the weakness of this situation. So the problem is in terms how the Palestine and the Palestine Authority can be reorganized internally with a different leadership. I think is one of the key points to have a clear perspective. And on the other side, of course, I think would be claim for a change of government of Israel. Netanyahu government is demonstrate, first of all, their incapacity to manage in a different way the situation and to be under the pressure of the worst forces in Israel and the political forces in Israel that they prefer to consider the war as the main way to conduct a politics in the region. So I think it's clear that without a change, a substantial change in terms of the leadership of Israel government, is very difficult to imagine a perspective for the dialogue. I think there is interesting elements in the civil society of Israel. I would like I think that is a real important point because in the political divide now we have in a confrontation between the pro-Palestinian and the pro-Israeli, that I think is one of the worst elements and is one of the obstacle, the main obstacle to open a dialogue. We need to reactivate and dynamize in a different way the situation. So I think, for example, to start identify and establishing relationship with some elements of the civil society in Israel is important. Second point is important to try to convince the different Jewish communities in Europe and worldwide to have a different approach. No? Because I think this theorem in which the government of Israel is representing Israel and all the Jewish people is practically aligned on this position, I think is practically the main obstacle to open a different perspective. And on the other side, even on the Palestinian side, I think we need to identify different subjects, different movements able to reduce and minimize the political weight of Hamas. Otherwise, I think is not realistic to imagine any peace scenario. I think I can stop for the moment on this. The last point I think is important for us to discuss what is the role of Europe, the political role of Europe. And I am very, very depressed on my side, considering and waiting for an important initiative at the level of at the European level, the Parliament, the European Commission, the different, even our representative, high representative for the foreign affairs, that is practically not influencing, not creating rooms for an active role of Europe in the Mediterranean situation and in the Middle East region. And that I think is the main point of our agenda, how we can try to create this link between our political representative, our institution, European institution, and the different civil societies in the different European states. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Giampietro. I will now give the floor to Alex, and linking up exactly to what Giampietro was just saying about the role of Europe into this. If we look from an external perspective, from the perspective of citizens, we see some kind of impasse at the European level, the incapacity to take some proper decisions and positions on this issue. But I also wanted Alex to comment on the privileged role that Malta has, because Malta has been one of the first countries in the world to recognize the state of Palestine back in 1988. And this also had the support of both parties at the time in Malta. So in a way, Malta can be a guiding light at European level, because it's one of the very few examples of countries that has diplomatic relations both with Palestine and Israel. But I was, of course, intrigued by the role that you see, Alex, in that the Parliament can play in this current debate.
Yes, very relevant question, and I want also to reiterate what Giampietro has rightly pointed out. I think that Europe, the European Parliament, the European institutions, the European Commission are failing, and they have failed miserably in this situation. First of all, we are seeing a lot of hypocrisy in how we are dealing with two wars, two conflicts that are going on. If you compare the European Parliament, the European Commission, the European institutions' reaction to the war of aggression on Ukraine, and ultimately what we are seeing happening in front of our eyes in Gaza and also in the West Bank, because we are always mentioning Gaza, but there is also a massacre going on in the West Bank. And in the West Bank, we don't have Hamas, who are hiding in tunnels and creating terrorism, which is the narrative of the Israelis, and still innocent Palestinians are being killed in the West Bank without the excuse of Hamas. I think that in a situation where for months now we have been seeing acts of which are not in accordance with international law. We have seen killing of innocent civilians, a war which is totally unproportionate. We have seen attacks on hospitals. We have seen a situation whereby leading Israeli government officials and members of the Netanyahu government doing statements which are against every principle of humanity. And at the same time, we are seeing one discussion after the other in the European Parliament. We are seeing and we are witnessing a number of small MEPs, a small minority. We are not more than 90 MEPs from 705 MEPs in the European Parliament who have been pushing now from last October for a resolution calling for an unconditional ceasefire. And this text has been voted down one plenary after the other. I think this is something which does not bode well for the European Union, for the fundamental principle of the European Union. Why was the European Union created in the 50s? The European Union was created on the basis of peace, collaboration, dialogue. What kind of dialogue, what kind of peace initiatives are we pushing forward? Are we moving forward as a European Union? Zero. Or more than that, the only message that the European Union, the European Parliament, and the European Commission have ultimately shown during this conflict was unconditional support a few days after the genocide that started from the Israeli side. This is nothing more than ethnic cleansing. This is nothing more than international war crimes. And ultimately, we have a situation where there is no action, no condemnation at all. So if you tell me, are you optimistic for the future? I will tell you, in this current geopolitical situation where Europe has lost its core values when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to pushing for peace, for dialogue, for finding a basic solution, a two-state solution. As you rightly pointed out, as a Maltese, I am proud that our forefathers have fought so hard, and they were first on the diplomatic scene, recognizing Palestine. We were one of the first independent countries who advocated for a two-state solution. And ultimately, when you see the way that the United States is treating the situation, the lack of compassion, the answer to what is happening, the way that they are treating the Israeli government in front of what is happening and how they are dealing with IDF and their actions on the ground, the way that the High Representative, the European Parliament President, the President of the European Commission are dealing with the situation, I am not very hopeful, especially after the June elections, when we will definitely see a bigger shift on the right in the European Parliament. I am not very optimistic to see a stronger push from the European Parliament to advocate for peace, to advocate for humanity, because ultimately here we are not only speaking about finding a solution. Here we are speaking of a core value, a fundamental value, the value of humanity. How can you turn your face in the opposite direction when you are seeing a genocide happening in front of your eyes? How can you not take action, not condemn the fact that you have a colonizer, you have a government which is basically stopping the most basic infrastructure and the most basic service to a people which are entrapped in a conflict zone? And ultimately, the situation has been going on now for a number of months. So I think that Europe has to play a more diplomatic role, because ultimately we are losing our raison d'etre. Why do we have a European Union? Why do we have a European project? Why are we not abiding with our fundamental principles, our reason for existence? The European Union project came into existence to concentrate on dialogue, to concentrate on peace, to concentrate on cooperation, instead of concentrating on wars, on aggression. And now the only narrative that I'm hearing in the European Parliament and the European institution is the creation of a Commissioner for Security and Defense, the creation of a European army, investment in missiles, in armaments, which I totally cannot understand this narrative. So we need more diplomacy. We need more actions by the civil society to bring our politicians back to their senses, because ultimately I think that the majority of politicians in the European Parliament are losing the touch of what the majority of Europeans want in this current situation. And I believe that the majority of European citizens are in favor of peace, dialogue, to try to find a common situation after more than 70 years of occupation, illegal occupation by the Israeli government in Palestinian territories, in Palestinian land. But we need a lot of courage, and we need a shift when it comes to the narrative, not only from the European Union, but also from other governments. If you tell me also, Arab states, are they doing enough? I will tell you, I don't think that it's enough. If we don't see more unity from not only Arab states, but also Mediterranean states, because ultimately this is also a Mediterranean conflict, we will never be able to send a strong message, a unified message to the Israeli government. So I think that we have a lot of work in front of us, but I am definitely not optimistic that we can find a solution, a long-lasting, sustainable solution to this very deadly conflict. Ultimately, not only a conflict, but because I don't like to describe this as a conflict, but this is ethnic cleansing and a genocide. Imagine 20 years after what happened in Rwanda, in the genocide in Rwanda, we look back and we say that we ignored what happened there, where 1 million innocent civilians died in this ethnic war. History is repeating itself. But maybe because the Israelis are doing it, maybe because of the power, economic power, diplomatic power of the Israelis, the backing of the United States, everyone is afraid to speak out and call this a genocide. And before we recognize and before we accept with strong words what is going on and describe it as it is, and not continue to hide under the excuse of a war of self-defense, because this is not self-defense, this is aggression, and there is no proportionality at all. You don't need to be a military expert to understand that this is not proportionate and this is going against all fundamental laws under international law. So if we don't describe this conflict, this war, this genocide for what it is, we can never be able to work for de-escalation and ultimately work for a long and sustainable peace solution in the region.
Many thanks, Alex. And personally, I wanted to express my appreciation for expressing your position in such a strong and brave way, because possibly you are the member of a majority party across Europe that is expressing positions of this kind of strength, probably even stronger than what is happening from France and Belgium and other countries that have put their head towards the solution of this issue. Thank you very much. We now go to Andre and see the other side of the same coin, because we've seen the approach that is being taken by the European institutions on this issue. But I'm now interested in knowing what is the reaction and the perception of the general public in Malta in particular about what is going on and what could be done to move towards a direction of building peace in the region. Andre.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to this important this discussion. Well, I think in Malta, the public in Malta, like most other countries, I would say, is a bit not sure what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening between Israel and Palestine. And they are not sure because we have been hearing about this for so long, but at the same time, so superficially, I would say. And right now, when we are in the age of social media, where we see 1,001 news items every day coming from all over the world, the people, it's very easily that they get disoriented, that they are not sure what we're talking about here. And I think this is a major issue when we talk about Palestine and Israel and what kind of solutions there could be and how we could move towards those kind of solutions. So the public, I think, and that's where the role of organizations and also of political parties, of the media comes in. We need to explain in very simple terms what the situation in Palestine and Israel is. Because often we have been hearing, and I think this is part of the agenda itself, that it is a complex issue. We always, if you hear most of the discussion on this topic, they start with saying, you know, this is a very complex issue. When I think it is not. Of course, there are complexities, like in every issue, but fundamentally, it is not a complex issue. It is an issue where you had over 75 years of colonization by Israel of that land. So you had Palestinians that were pushed out of their lands by different means, whether through direct military engagement, wars, making their life miserable, occupation. So there were different phases during the story, but it was basically the same pattern all over. And of course, within this context, then you have the conflict, because there is a conflict between Palestine and Israel. There have been different military groups, militias that were fighting, different type of attacks too. But all of this was happening within a context of colonization by Israel of Palestinian land. And it is this issue that most often is missing from discussions on this issue, because if we do not acknowledge that there is a reality of colonization, then it's very difficult to understand what kind of solution there can be. And the people out there, they will find it hard to understand what's actually taking place. Many think, and I do not blame them for this, that it is a conflict between Muslims and Jews, when it has very little to do with it, actually. In fact, Palestinians are not only Muslims, there are Palestinian Christians, and also Israel historically has not been supported only by Jews. So it is not, this is fundamentally not a religious conflict that is taking place, but many think it is. So we need to reframe our ideas of what is happening there to be able to find a solution. And that doesn't mean that we should not look at the complexities of the case that are there. And when we talk about finding a solution, of course, we have to accept that we cannot go back in history. What's there is there. That is a complex situation where you have a tiny piece of land, because overall, Palestine and Israel, it's not a massive piece of land. You have a tiny piece of land where there are people from different groups. Muslims, Christians, Jews, people who identify as Israeli, people who identify as Palestinians, living next to each other in a very small piece of land. And Palestinians have been going through this process of being dispossessed from their lands. Now, what can be done at this stage? And what can be done is, because, of course, in a way, the easy answer to all this, and it is an important answer to give, but the easy answer, the easy way out is to say that we have to have dialogue, negotiations, peace processes, and it's all true. We need all that. But we have to understand that that did take place over the past decades. There were a number of peace processes, dialogue initiatives taking place. The outcome was that the situation went from bad to worse. And there is basically one factor why they were never successful. And the point is that Israel never really engaged, seriously engaged, in any peace process or dialogue initiative. Why? Because Israel always thought, because it did have, that it can do whatever it wants, because it has the backing of the United States and the backing of many European countries. And so it didn't feel that it was needed for it, that it was necessary for Israel to seriously engage in some form of peace process. Already in '94, when there were the Oslo agreements, the Oslo agreements were basically a sham. I mean, Israel kept control over everything. The Palestinians were forced to recognize Israel, accept a compromise. The Palestinians accepted to have a state on to just 20% of the land they have historically inhabited. And even there, Israel was, even in those two tiny pieces of disjointed pieces of land that the Palestinians had left, Gaza and the West Bank, even there, Israel was not ready to allow the Palestinians to have their state. So what is happening here? I would say, turning to the questions of what Europe can do, my answer would be this: Europe has been very much part of the problem on what's taking place in the Middle East. It was part of the problem because Israel felt secure that it could continue seizing forcibly Palestinian land, building the settlements in the West Bank, stealing the water, blockading Gaza, regularly attacking it, as happened over the past 17 years, without any consequences from Europe and also from the US. That would change if European countries, and hopefully also the United States, start adopting a different approach and not giving this blank check to Israel to do whatever it wants. The situation there would change overnight. At least Israel would have an incentive to go to the negotiating table and seriously engage in these discussions, something that has not happened at all over the past years. While, as we have seen, while Israel was engaging in these so-called peace processes, it was at the same time aggressively expanding its settlements in the West Bank. So it was clearly that this was all a sham, because you cannot be thinking about peace and also a solution of two states, while at the same time, actually, the more there was some kind of peace process taking place, the more Israel was aggressively expanding its settlements in the West Bank. And Israel did all this because Israel on its own would not feel confident enough to do all this. But it did all this because it felt secure. It felt secure enough that whatever it will do, there will be no serious consequences from European countries and the US. If that changes, Israel will have no other option but to seriously engage in a discussion that could lead to a solution. But there needs to be a radical difference in the approach by the European countries, the EU, and also the US.
Thank you very much, Andre, about your contribution. Now, I would want to go back to Alex. He's connected back to us. I don't see his video, but I hope he can still hear us. Otherwise, I will move to... Oh, here we are. Back you are. Alex, I was intrigued by a comment that you made in your first answer to my question, and that is your general prediction that the European elections will see a movement or a shift towards the right, which is quite worrying. I'm predicting myself a kind of polarization of the electorate, both to the right and to the left. But I wanted you to expand a bit on this. But I also wanted you to articulate what you see the role of Malta as the government of Malta and the representatives of Malta in the European Parliament. What could be the role that they could play, because you're coming from a neutrality kind of point of view and you're having this kind of privileged position from my point of view to have diplomatic relations with both sides. You've disappeared again, but I'm hoping that you will reappear. Here you are. Back to you, Alex.
So, expanding a little bit more about the what is happening in the European Parliament. Let's start from this point, just to give a perspective about how the right-wing groups in the European Parliament and the narrative that they are pushing forward. For example, last week in the plenary of the European Parliament, we had a discussion on the current state of play in this war that is happening in Gaza, and we had a majority of speakers in the European Parliament coming from EPP and the far right, who were ultimately attacking the UN for its humanitarian activities, which is the only lifeline that Gaza, that the civilians, the Palestinian civilians in Gaza have. This is the only lifeline for food, electricity, water, medical equipment. And we had a situation whereby the majority of speakers in the European Parliament, the majority coming from the right, were basically attacking the United Nations and saying that ultimately the civil society, which is the lifeline for thousands of Palestinians, are basically agents of Hamas. So when you are seeing this narrative, when you look at the numbers right now, we are seeing a shift from the center going more to the right. This is the reality that we are seeing right now in a big chunk of member states throughout the European Union. These are the electoral predictions that we have until today. And if you see where the narrative is going today, when you have a more balanced parliament and what could happen post-June, I think that we would be in a much worse situation whereby we will be continuing with this stupid narrative that ultimately the Israeli war is a war of self-defense, which is definitely not. And I agree with Andrea that the majority, although the majority of our citizens are confused with what is happening, but I still believe that humanity always wins. And ultimately, when the majority of European citizens are seeing and witnessing this deadly conflict, when they are seeing, and ultimately you take stock of the situation, and you see the losses on both sides, and you see the aggression on basic infrastructures, on hospitals, on refugee camps, on civilian infrastructure. Ultimately, you cannot accept the fact that this is self-defense, that ultimately this is not ethnic cleansing, this is not a genocide happening in front of our eyes. I think Malta plays a very important role, not only as an unaligned and ultimately as a military neutral, let's put it like that, member in the European Union. I think we are one of the only voices left in this current position, but ultimately, and as a social democrat, I feel a responsibility because this was one of our priorities in international politics, that ultimately we should give a voice to Palestinians, that ultimately we should speak with a strong voice when we see injustice like this happening in front of our eyes, when it comes to occupation, when it comes to this vicious game that now has been going on for a number of years, where basic utilities are being controlled by a foreign occupier on land that should and must belong to Palestinians. So I think that Malta should and must continue to play a very important role in this regard, both now in our position in OSCE, but also as playing a strong voice in the European Union and also at the UN level, where we should continue to push not only for useless resolutions, because ultimately I don't know how many different resolutions have been voted in the UN, We have seen also the Secretary General speaking his mind and being just in his remarks when it comes to general observation of this conflict. And ultimately, we saw the disproportionate reaction of the Israeli representative in the UN, where he was attacking directly the UN Secretary General because he spoke about facts. He spoke about an occupation. He spoke about a struggle which led to resistance. And ultimately, when you face all of this oppression, it's part of the human nature that you will end up with resistance. You cannot condemn resistance where you have been occupied and you have been treated like an animal for more than 70 years. So there, although I can never justify violence, but I cannot not justify resistance and the resistance of the Palestinian civilians. But ultimately, I think that, yes, Malta plays a very important role in the European Union to be a strong voice for dialogue, for peace, for non-alignment, to bring sense, ultimately, in this very delicate geopolitical situation that we are living right now. In the verge of seeing, as I said, a shift to the right in the European Parliament, on the verge of seeing Trump re-elected as US president in the US, who could bring more instability in the Middle East with his actions, with his rhetoric, with his solutions, let's put it like that. So yes, we play, although we are one of the smallest members also in the United Nations, I think that we should and we must play a very important role because of our geopolitical positioning, because of our neutrality clause in the Constitution, because we were never military aligned since our independence. So it's really important for us to continue to speak frankly, in an open mind on this situation. And I believe that we have done a lot in our positioning in the United Nations, where we had a seat in the Security Council until a couple of months ago, in our position in the OSCE right now, in the presidency of the OSCE right now. I think we are doing also a good job there to try to push forward the agenda for peace, for dialogue, for finding a sustainable long-term solution to this conflict, and we should do more. And when I say we should do more, as I said in my initial remarks, I think that we have to start even by using strong language, but strong language is needed right now because this is what is really happening on the ground, what is really happening in front of our eyes. This is not fake news. This is not distorted facts. These are facts. 30,000 civilians have been killed during this genocide that is happening in a piece of land that is practically the size of Malta, with a population of 1 million Palestinians in this tiny piece of land. So I think that we should start from this point by speaking very clearly. This should be our role. Describing this war as it is, which is definitely not self-defense, and ultimately put diplomatic and international pressure, even economic pressure, when it comes to, for example, companies who are occupying and who are using occupied land ultimately for their production, companies and multinationals who are also directly controlled by Israelis. And we should start from there. When civil society, when we expose ultimately, and we speak frankly so that everyone can understand what is happening, when we speak frankly about the situation, I think that from there we can increase our pressure, diplomatic pressure, and we can achieve some kind of solution and not end up with a situation when in front of I don't know how many different resolutions have been passed from the United Nations, we are still in this awkward, stupid situation where the Israelis think that they can do whatever they like because ultimately they have their trump card to say that if we speak our mind and speak the truth on the situation, that we are anti-Semite, that we have something against Israelis, which is definitely not the case. So that is why we need more courage. We need to be more direct in explaining the war as it is. This is a genocide. This is purely ethnic cleansing.
Thank you very much, Alex, for your frankness of the strength of your language already. Just a reminder that in terms of time, we are within the last 10 minutes of the allotted time. So please have very succinct answers to the remaining questions. Andre, from your perspective, we are talking about putting pressure on institutions. Now, what do you think could be the share that you could do within Malta and with your connection with the general public in Malta to put pressure on Maltese institutions to ensure that the message coming from the grassroots is actually conveyed with the effectiveness and the strength that we've just mentioned to your institutions?
Okay, so I think it's something we already do. In Malta, we are very active about the Palestinian issue, and we do solidarity events, protests, talking directly to politicians. And of course, this is not something that is being done only in Malta. All over the world, Palestinians still have a powerful weapon in their hands, and that is the one of international solidarity. So millions, tens of millions around the world have been very vociferous about standing up for Palestine. And I think this is part of the solution to all this. In a way, it's one of the last tools that Palestinians have at their disposal, in the sense this important and powerful global solidarity movement. And because that then, hopefully, and it does, it reflects itself on the policy level. If the people show that they care, if the people, even those who are not Palestinians, who are living in other countries around the world, so show forcefully that Palestine is something that they care about, that they cannot stand seeing genocide happening before their eyes, that we cannot tolerate having a situation of apartheid, that we cannot accept having occupation. If all over the world there are groups, important groups, that are showing that this is something we are ready to fight for because we do care about this, I'm hopeful that politicians will have to hear that. And the politicians, those then who are involved in the foreign policy and the policies and the stands being taken by governments and countries, that will hopefully change the direction that we have seen so far, and that is this unconditional backing for Israel. And when I'm talking about the unconditional backing for Israel, I'm not just talking about what happened after the 7th of October. This is something that is long-standing. And I would say that the 7th of October, what we are seeing now, the genocide in Gaza right now, is not a reaction to something that happened a few months ago. It is a continuation. I would say it is a culmination of what we have seen over the past 76 years. So yes, the movement of solidarity with Palestine needs to be active, strategic, because by being active, by showing that we care, that it is something that we feel, an issue that is concerning us, that will hopefully shift the policy that we have been seeing at the European level, for example, but not only, of course, because that is, I think, the only kind of solution that we can have to this conflict. It's by withdrawing this unconditional backing to Israel. Only then there can be serious negotiations, discussions, and everything. As long as Israel will feel that it has impunity, that it can do whatever it wants without consequence, then there will be no hope for peace. Because what has been happening over the past few years is that Israel was also, and I would say not Israel, the whole world was being given the illusion that we can just forget about the Palestinians, that we can go on as if the Palestinians do not exist and normalize relations with the Arab countries and stop talking about Palestine, stop thinking that there should be a Palestinian state or that Palestinians have a right to live in that land with equal rights. We had even stopped talking about all this. But what has happened over the past few months, what it has shown us, of course, at a huge cost, at the cost of the tens of thousands of Palestinian lives. But what it has shown everyone was that Palestine will not go away. That as long as the Palestinians are given equal rights, as long as the Palestinians' right to statehood, to have a home, is recognized and actualized, then the problem will not simply go away. It will stay there.
Fantastic. Many thanks, Andre. Giampietro, you're the last one for this round, but I think it will be the last round of questions. You have the opportunity to try and sum up a bit what has been discussed in terms of proposals that are coming out from this meeting. But also, of course, you may have questions to the other speakers that have proposed very interesting positions about the organization that they represent. So I leave it to you, Giampietro, but considering that but now we have hit the limits.
We try to be very, very concise. Now, I would like to draw your attention on one point, first of all. Always in the logic to try to imagine a feasible perspective in terms of political and diplomatic initiative. I think the first point is to consider that European Union missed to develop and to manage a real Mediterranean strategy and policy in the last decade. That I think is a real political failure for European Union. Because the Middle East is related to the situation in the Mediterranean basin. So I think we have to retake this aspect, this frame, because it's not only the problem, of course, of Palestine, it's the problems of Egypt, it's the problem of Lebanon, it's the problem of the Maghreb. And I think in general, the different relationship with these countries and in the region could be helpful for to legitimate a role of European Union. No, it's clear that we have a lack of now of USA in the region in terms of political initiative, even in terms of credibility and legitimacy of the Biden administration. But this void, this vacuum is completely not filled by Europe. So I think the very important point, and maybe is very important point even the Malta perspective, because you are in the middle of the Mediterranean and could be play a role as part of political European Union. But I would like to draw your attention to another aspect. You, Andre, consider and you recall the long history of this conflict. It's clear that this conflict is based on a lack of dialogue and opposite narratives of the two perspectives of Israeli and Palestinian. And we need to break this kind of parallel and schizophrenic narrative. I don't know why. I don't know how we can try to break this situation. But I imagine there is an important point we have to put on our agenda. Is, for example, the economic divide now between the condition of life of Palestinian people and Israeli people. And that is a real contradiction in the situation to be able to be a good neighbor, because there is not neighbors if you have a so far distance, so enormous distance in terms of condition of material condition, economic condition of life. And that is part of in our maybe important European Union agenda to intervene immediately in terms of humanitarian aid. That is another scandal on my point of view, the absence of a very emergency important humanitarian aid by Europe, and to relaunch a new important economic cooperation and public aid for Palestine and for the region. So that I think is an important point, because if you consider that that is my lecture of the situation, Palestine and Palestinian people are not only without any political room and capacity to develop their own sovereignty, but they are in a situation in which practically Palestinian people is just like another migrant people in a very security situation in which they completely put in isolation, is incapacity to decide on their own economic development. So that is part of the more general and global migration problem. I have two questions, in particular to Alexander. One is, you consider, of course, this not optimistic perspective in terms of the different weight that the right could have in Europe. But unfortunately, I have to underline some weakness that is responsible maybe of even the left wing. Last week in Rome, you had an important summit of European socialists, and it's clear that there is a division, different point of view, different position, even among the different socialist party in Europe. If I consider Germany, for example, the Chancellor Scholz, this is far, I imagine, very far from your position. And even in the last resolution, it was difficult even to put the ceasefire as an important point of the agenda of the declaration, the final declaration of the Party of the European Socialists. So I think how we can, you imagine, it's possible to reconstruct, rebuild a sort of harmonization in terms of the political judgment and the political analysis about, in general, foreign affairs policy, and in general, this particular relationship with the Middle East. And the second point, the second question is about, I suggest could be interesting, a very clear and very supportive initiative by Malta in collaboration with other countries that they are in favor to recognize the state of Palestine. I imagine Spain, Ireland, Belgium. That is a group important, even the European East countries. So in terms of number, there is an important number of European countries that could be, I don't know the majority, but could be a relevant number to raise this political issue in terms of a clear debate about the fact that the state of Palestine was recognized by European Union, and that it could be a big step to change the relationship and the role of European Union in the region. I don't know. I ask you to react on these 2 points. One, I imagine, is something painful, because in reality is part of some internal division of even your political group. But it's important to be honest on this. That is not only the right wing, is not only the Conservative Party, is not the extreme right. I think there is a sort of a spirit that is very worrying on my point of view about a sort of warfare economy. We are constructing a sort of mechanism in which we consider the production of weapons and the creating of economy of war as part of our economy. The very worrying declaration by, for example, the president of the European Commission, that they consider the fight against COVID at the same level of the same approach to be a sort of common public expense on production of weapons. I think it's something that is part of a vision, a very dangerous vision of the future of the role of European Union. I don't know. What do you think?
Alex, I leave to you two questions to answer, and then I have eventually another question from the public, which may be quite a short one. It could be a yes or no. Alex, please.
So yes, on the first question of Giampietro, the issue of, and you mentioned specifically the German delegation and the German members in SND. History is what it is. So I think it's more of a historical thorny issue for our German members in the group, and I can understand a little bit when they are and they can be faced with the issue of anti-Semitism, etc. So this is the narrative that the majority of the European members in the European Parliament are always attacking us when we are speaking and describing this war as it is. So when we try to defend the Palestinian people, when we try to push forward the narrative for a two-state solution, for recognizing the state of Palestine, we are always being attacked of anti-Semite. Maybe we can shoulder that criticism in the environment, in the German environment, the historical narrative and the punchiness of the term anti-Semitic. I think it is not to justify the narrative, but it is maybe a little bit more difficult for our German colleagues to shoulder. So there I can understand, but when you see the way that the majority, the big majority of SND members of the left part in the European Parliament, how we are voting, how we are also tackling this issue in the plenary, I think there is a stark difference from the right side of the European Parliament. So there I cannot say that we are very much divided, but yes, we are not totally unified on the subject. On the second question, the idea of forming a strong coalition of those member states who can advocate and who already willingly accepted the fact that we should fight for a Palestinian state, I think that is a very good idea. It is something that we should and we must explore and also push forward, and why not also take the lead as Malta, because of our historical acceptance of a two-state solution, because of our strategic positioning as a bridge between the Middle East and Central Europe. I think that there we must and we should play a more relevant role, although we did also our part during these past months, but I always say that we can and we must do more in this very challenging time. But yes, I think that Malta should take the lead, and also, as I said, unequivocally, and as I said in many different situations, we must use stronger messages, stronger narrative to describe this conflict also by supporting the South African initiative of calling a spade in this situation and calling Israelis and the IDF for their war crimes. I think that should be the start, but also to diplomatically push forward also this message that yes, we should be bold enough to build this momentum for like-minded member states to recognize and to push Europe to recognize the state of Palestine.
Alex, I don't know whether you were reading my mind, but the question that was coming from the public was precisely around the role that Malta could play in the ICJ trial, where South Africa...
I didn't read the question. It was spontaneous.
No, you're reading my mind, because the question was somewhere written, but you haven't access to that. So the question was whether Malta should be the first European country to actually endorse the request that has been put by South Africa.
I supported this line of thought more than 2 months ago when I said publicly that yes, Malta, when asked directly, Malta should support this initiative, because in my eyes, I cannot describe what is happening, in other words, than going against humanity, going against international going in the direction of international war crimes. This is what's happening. And I am not saying this because I'm an anti-Semite. I have something against Israelis. I have nothing against anyone. But we have to be bold, and we have to describe what is happening in ultimately the terminology and in the legal terminology that is. And for me, yes, this is pure war crimes. This is not self-defense. There is no proportionality. These are crimes against innocent people, against civilians, against civilian infrastructure, which I'm a lawyer by profession. And when we studied international law, these were the most basic crimes that fall under international war crimes. And for me, what is happening in front of our eyes is purely international war crimes. But because Israel is doing it, imagine if some other state did such atrocities, how many condemnations we would have seen, how many different UN resolutions would pass from the Security Council, how many sanctions we would impose. But unfortunately, because it is Palestinians, because of the excuse of Hamas, I never justified, although I can understand resistance, I never justify violence, especially violence against civilians, but we cannot continue to hide behind this narrative of Hamas everywhere to justify the killing of innocent people and the attacks on basic Palestinian infrastructure, with the excuse that now the US and the big economic powers who support Israel will rebuild back Gaza. Ultimately, all those innocent civilians, all those families who were destroyed, no one of us, no superpower can bring back innocent civilians who have been killed, massacred in this, again, I'm not ashamed to say it, in this ethnic cleansing, in this genocide that is happening in front of our eyes.
Many thanks to everybody. I have the feeling that this debate, which has been most interesting, is probably a step in a direction, in a sense that there were plenty of issues that have been flagged up, and we will not be able, of course, to resolve them in this hour of debate. So my suggestion is that we could have further events of this kind, even simply within the context of Malta, because it's a very interesting case within the European architecture, and I think there is a lot that could be brought from this particular case to a wider relevance. So thanks a million to everybody, and I can say probably see you next time.
Thank you, Enzo. Thank you to everybody.
Thanks a million.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.